So today we're talking about that horrible tragedy of a prank gone wrong and the shooting death of Timothy Wilks in Nashville, Tennessee. We're going to talk about the legal implications of what happened, and we're going to try to sort all of that out in today's episode. I'm Joshua Roberts, attorney at law, and you are watching Lawyer Up. Today we have Grayson Roberts in the studio with us, and we're going to do a little Q&A. We're going to give you a lawyer's perspective on the law of self-defense. We're going to define murder and how self-defense is used as a legal defense to that type of a charge. We're going to talk about deadly force. We're going to talk about non-lethal force, the duty to retreat, the castle doctrine, the stand your ground laws. We're going to talk about all of that stuff today, all in the context of the shooting of Timothy Wilks back on February 5th of 2021. If you enjoy the podcast and the episode, smash that like button for me. If you got something to say, you got a question, put it in the comment sections below. If you would like to learn more about the law, legal topics, these types of current events, then subscribe to the channel. And as always, I love it when you share me on social media. All right, so let's talk about this. You got some questions?
I do, as always.
As always, let's go.
So walk us through the legal analysis of self-defense.
Okay. All right, so it's a defense to a charge, right? And usually we're talking about murder, or it could be an assault. But if you talk about murder, murder is the intentional and the unjustified killing of another person. So it's got to be both. It's got to be intentional and it's got to be unjustified. So if I'm driving my car and I lose control on the ice and I hit somebody and kill them, that's not murder because it was accidental. It's not intentional. Likewise, it's got to be unjustified. There are justified intentional killings with a soldier in wartime, the death penalty. Yep, I intended to kill him, but it was justified legally. Yeah. And then there's self-defense where, I intended to kill that person, but it is justified legally because it's self-defense. So self-defense is a justification for an act that would otherwise be a criminal act. It would otherwise be murder or assault. It would be if I punch somebody or something, but if it's in self-defense, it's not an assault anymore. It's a defense to a legal accusation of something that would be a crime.
All right. So what is the difference between deadly force and non-deadly force?
It's kind of common sense, right? But the law says that deadly force is that degree of force that is reasonably calculated to lead to death or serious bodily harm. So you don't have to kill the person. It could be serious bodily harm. And we're talking a gun. We're talking a knife. We're talking a crowbar to the skull. Yeah. Those are deadly weapons. That's deadly force. And then when you're talking about non-deadly force, it's just that degree of force that is not likely to lead to death or serious bodily harm. And that's just like a push or a shove where I can, knock you off like that. That's non-lethal. Probably not going to kill you if I shove you, right?
No, maybe. When can you use deadly force and when can you not use deadly force?
All right. So non-deadly force is easy. You always have the right to use reasonable non-deadly force to repel an unwanted contact. If somebody comes up and they're wanting to get in your face, you can push them away. You can always use reasonable non-deadly or non-lethal force. Now, reasonableness, that's the key, right? So if your grandma is coming in for a kiss and you don't want grandma to kiss you, you can't cock right in the face. Just bam! Hey, non-deadly force, granny. So it's got to be reasonable. So it's got to fit the situation, right? So you can shove your grandma away. I mean, okay, no, granny, I don't want to do that. So, but you can't, go over the top with it. And you can only
Floyd Mayweather, the poor granny.
That's right. You don't want to do that. It's got to be reasonable. And you can only use non-deadly force in defense of property. A lot of people will think that, somebody's getting into my car, I'm going to shoot them. Well, no, you can't use, say it a different way, right? That you can't use deadly force to defend property. And they give that example that you're in the hotel and you look out the window and somebody's breaking in your car. You can't pull out a gun and shoot them because you can't use deadly force to protect your property.
Mhm.
You can only use deadly force to protect human life, yours or
Mhm.
somebody else's.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the key and the difference between deadly force and non-deadly force. And for deadly force, you can only use it when you're dealing with protecting human life, and 2, the threat that's coming at you has to be serious. It has to be, you have to be an imminent threat of death or serious bodily harm yourself. So if somebody's wanting to throw a Nerf ball at you, that's not, you're not going to be fearing death or serious bodily harm.
No.
And it's got to be imminent. So it's got to be an immediate threat. So if somebody says, I'm going to kill you tomorrow, that's not an imminent threat. So you can't just preemptively say, well, I'm going to shoot you today so that you don't kill me tomorrow. The threat has to be coming at you. It's got to be imminent, right? So those things are all required if you're going to use deadly force. And what gets really interesting is that some states require what's called a duty to retreat. If you can retreat safely, if you can get out of the situation, then you have a duty to do that before you are justified in using deadly force.
That's wild. That's really wild. So, what is the duty to retreat?
So the duty to retreat states that, like I said, you have to retreat or avoid that conflict if you can do so safely.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, if you can't get away safely, you don't have to. But if you can, then you are justified, or you have to do so. You have to get away from the situation before you can use deadly force. And in law school, they gave us the example of you're in an elevator and there's somebody loading a gun with intent to shoot you, and all you have to do is, basically take your finger off the button and let the doors close. You have to do that, right? You have to leave. You have to retreat. You can't just hold the door open and be like, all right, get it loaded, then I'm going to pop you. So you're supposed to, in the duty to retreat, de-escalate the situation, remove yourself from the situation if you can do so safely, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what the duty to retreat says.
Does that apply everywhere?
It does not. There are a lot of exceptions to that. Most notably is in your home. It's called the castle doctrine, right? A man's home is his castle. That's where that comes from. And you have no duty to retreat from your home. And because where would you go?
Yeah.
That's my home. This is, I'm not going to retreat from here because this is my castle. So they call it the castle doctrine. Almost every state has that says you don't have a duty to retreat from your own home. You are just fine in defending your home. You don't have to retreat. If somebody comes into your house, you don't have to sneak out the back door. You can basically, if they're breaking in and they intend to do you harm, you can pop them without any duty to retreat.
So what are the stand your ground laws?
All right, so that's similar. There are laws that have been extended beyond your home, beyond the castle doctrine, that say that in general, the stand your ground laws say that anywhere that you're entitled to be, then you can stand your ground. You don't have to retreat. You don't have a duty to retreat from certain areas, and you can stand your ground. So that's what the stand your ground laws are. It's like just like you're at home in your castle.
Yeah.
If you're out somewhere else, stand your ground laws say you don't have a duty to retreat. If you're legally entitled to be there, you don't have to retreat before you use deadly force. If you're facing some sort of a lethal, something coming at you, somebody coming at you with a knife or whatever. So lots of states have limited stand your ground laws. For example, they'll specify places where you can stand your ground and places where you can't. And usually, obviously, it's always in your home. You can always stand your ground in your home. But also the workplace is common. They call it the dwelling. So wherever you're staying, if you're staying in a hotel room or whatever, or I've even seen it applied to somebody in a campground in their tent. That's my dwelling. You have the ability to defend where you're staying. You don't have to retreat. And then cars is a very common area where you don't have a duty to retreat from your own car. And some of those laws were put in to prevent carjackings and stuff. So you don't have to run off. You got a gun in your car and you're facing a carjacker. You can pop them. You don't have to retreat from that particular situation. So that is the limited stand your ground laws. And there are other states are like, hey, it doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't make a damn bit of difference. You can stand. It's like Missouri. And it's a wild, wild west, man. Somebody's screwing with you. You don't have to retreat at all. You can stand your ground, and you can use you can match lethal force with a lethal threat. So yeah, exactly.
Gotta love it.
Gotta love it.
So what about in Tennessee where Timothy Wilks was shot and killed in a connection with the prank, a YouTube prank?
Yeah, that's a sad situation. Let's talk about that specific situation. So it's February 5th of 2021, and the guy's name was David Starnes Jr., I believe, 23-year-old. He's there with some friends. They're in the parking lot of the Urban Air Trampoline Park, right? They're in Nashville, Tennessee. They're hanging out. And Timothy Wilks, who's 20, he's a YouTuber. Him and a buddy, they approach the group, and they've got butcher knives, right? And they are acting like they're going to attack them. They're acting like they're going to rob them. And presumably, I haven't seen any video on this. If it's a YouTube prank, I assume somebody was videotaping this.
Yeah, but it's nowhere to be seen.
Well, it's in the hands of the police, probably. That's probably
we can't
who has
see
it. We don't have it yet, but ultimately it'll probably be released in maybe years. But anyway, so he approaches the group, and they have butcher knives out, and David pulls out a gun, and he shoots Wilks, and ultimately he dies. And it's a terrible tragedy because the guy was just pulling a prank. He wasn't doing anything wrong per se. Now, you could say there was poor judgment in what he was doing.
For sure.
But that comes with being 20, and poor judgment you shouldn't get the death penalty for making a bad call, having a bad practice. I mean, I've done lots of practical jokes that have backfired, or, I wish I hadn't gone the way it went, but you don't deserve the death penalty for that. So it's a terrible tragedy for his family. For sure. Just one of those things that shouldn't happen. But the question then, of course, is, was David Starnes, did he act in self-defense? Was that justified in what he did, or did he need to retreat from that situation? Did he have a duty to retreat before he pulled the trigger? And I looked up Tennessee's laws, and they are a limited stand your ground state. So they specifically state where you can and where you cannot use lethal force if you have not retreated. And theirs is, like I talked to you about before, you don't have to retreat from your house. You don't have to retreat from your work or your car or your dwelling if you're staying somewhere other than your house. Otherwise, you do have a duty to retreat. So if you're talking about a parking lot at a trampoline park, that's not your car, even though they were probably getting in or getting out of a car. That's not your home. That's not your work. And it's also not your dwelling. So there is an argument at first blush. You could say, well, wait a minute. Did he have to retreat before he pulled the trigger? Did he have a duty to retreat? And so when you think about it at first blush, you think, oh man, maybe he did. Maybe he needed to run. However, what we have to remember is you only have to retreat if you can do so safely. And that's the key here. You got two guys running up on you with butcher knives. And we haven't seen the video. We don't know how far off they were, but
just going from the scenario,
the scenario, that doesn't look like there's any real safe retreat. So if you can't retreat safely, then you don't have to retreat. You don't have to retreat at all. You can basically stand your ground. So you don't have to risk your life to try to get away from the situation. So that's the important thing. And probably in this situation, you've got a scenario where these guys are coming right up on him, and he didn't have to retreat because he could not do so safely. And one of the interesting things I ran across when I was looking at this was that there was a Supreme Court case called Brown versus United States. And it was decided in 1921, which is exactly 100 years ago from 2021, this incident. And the court specifically looked at this type of situation. And the quote was, detached reflection cannot be demanded in the presence of an upheld knife. And so basically what they're saying is, in the heat of the moment, you don't have time to fully process the situation. You're not going to be able to have detached reflection. And that's not required. So you don't have to, we sit here today and we talk about this and like, well, maybe he could have run this way. Or he could have run that way. But you don't have time to armchair quarterback this thing, Monday morning quarterback it where you look back and say, well, if we would have done this or that, things would have been differently.
Yeah.
But you don't have the ability to do that when you're in the situation. And the Supreme Court of the United States has said you don't have to do that. You just have to respond like a reasonable person would respond. So essentially, that's what the police have decided. They let him go. They didn't charge him with anything, and they don't plan to. They basically said this is a legitimate use of self-defense.
Justified.
It's justified. And unfortunately, we know that the threat wasn't real, but he didn't.
Yeah, there's no way he could have known that.
There's no way of knowing that.
No way he could have known that.
He, as the police have said, we have no intentions of filing charges. So we know it was a prank, but Starnes didn't know in the heat of the moment. And so basically the use of deadly force was justified in that case. And that's the legal. When I look at this situation, that's exactly the way I look at it. I would think that was self-defense. It's sad. It's a tragedy. But legally speaking, he didn't do anything wrong. That is what a lot of people would do in that exact scenario. And obviously the lesson is don't pull those types of pranks, especially in a day and age where people are they're carrying firearms, especially in Missouri. I mean, everybody, half the people around have firearms. So don't play stupid games and you get stupid prizes. That's what they say, but it's obviously give a little bit of thought. It's sad. Obviously our thoughts and prayers with the family, because it's a terrible thing that happened. But that is my opinion, my take on this particular situation. And that is our episode. We have talked about the laws of self-defense. We've talked about murder. We've talked about degrees of force. We've talked about deadly force, non-lethal force, duties to retreat, castle doctrine. We talked about all that stuff today.
Got it all covered. Of fun.
If you have enjoyed the episode, smash that like button for me. If you got something to say, you have a question, comment below. If you want to learn more about legal topics or current events, subscribe to the channel. And as always, as I always say, I love it when you share me on social media. I appreciate you watching. My name is Joshua Roberts. This is Grayson Roberts, and you've been watching A Lawyer Up.
Send lawyers, guns, and money. Dad, get me out of this.